Hey guys, welcome to part 3 of What If Naruto Was in Star Wars. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe, and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 13 Seeker. You think the dark side is your ally? I was reborn in it, molded by it. I didn't see the light until I was a Sith Lord. By then it was nothing to me but blinding. Seeker. Kenobi loved to fly. There was just something about the thrill of flight, of a fight, that got her juices flowing, loosened her up in all the right ways. A primal feeling of freedom, her life not in the hands of her contacts, or even her master, but herself. She controlled the outcome. Live or die, it was her decisions here that determined the outcome. No others. If she acted, that act was hers. If she blasted a fighter into atoms, it was hers. If she screwed up and got herself blasted into atoms, it was hers. Choice. She considered herself an able blade master and spy, yet it was here in the cockpit that she truly shone. That she felt alive. Not with a blade in her hands, lightning shooting from her fingertips, or even executing traitors to the cause. None, but here behind the controls. She was one with her machine, and it in turn was one with her. Every dive, roll, bank and turn an extension of her body. And it was glorious. She was the hunter, and the poor sods weren't going anywhere, they had seen to that. With an interdictor preventing any ships from fleeing to the relative safety of hyperspace, there was no escape. No surrender. Only death. Kenobi stubbornly quashed that small, tiny semblance of herself that pitied the people of Sereno. They'd chosen their side when they defied Naruto. This was merely the recompense for their temerity. She continued to track any who dared leave orbit, blasting them to bits, ripping them from the starry sky with the force when the mood struck her. Part of her wondered why Naruto himself joined the fray, but she quashed that as well. As of now, they're only the battle, only the burning planet below. Ship stitched an angry red line across the black of space. With each passing second she felt more and more lives wink out of existence. A Jedi would have been wholly overwhelmed by the loss of so much life, but as a Sith, she thrived on it. That was what it was all about, really. Emotion. Choice. Choice, and the decision to use one's emotions, but not be ruled by them. Just as Kenobi chose to finally allow a headhunter to flank her, chose to give it a sporting, if perhaps slim, chance to kill her. Turbolasers streaked past her shields, close enough to send alarms keening, but not enough to produce any lasting damage. Why the fool chose to pursue her instead of escape, she knew not. Nor did she care. He radiated anger and desperation and hatred deep into the Force, his very being marred with shock and confusions at the attack on his planet. Whomever he was obviously intent on taking one of the killers who burned this world with him. She might have found his determination admirable, if he weren't hopelessly outgunned. In the time it took him to so much as scratch her paint, her missiles made short work of a freighter. By the time he thought to his own projectiles, Grievous had already taken out 3 more. Honestly, was this fool even trying? Did he not care? Surely if he did, he would fight harder. The thought perturbed her regardless. Enough. If you're going to bore me, then you should just die. Within moments she grew weary of the game and decided to end it. She felt the pilot's anxiety warp into fear, then to terror, and she banked sharply, coming up beneath him. He swerved, but too late. A soft chime in her headset confirmed a missile lock on his engine. Fingers tightened on the trigger, curling around the weapon controls. For the span of 2 beats they hovered there. Then, squeezed. A fireball blossomed in space, accompanied by the rolling shock of a sudden death. With the pilot's passing, so too did her irritation fade. But only for a moment. Sweeping past the debris, she found herself flanked by a second ship, the sleek, dark, wedge shape bearing friendly colors as it shot past. You shouldn't play with your food. The last Hyliga glowered slightly to her cellar as Brood's voice trickled through her headset. She'd been so absorbed in the dogfight, if one could even call it such, that she'd forgotten about the others. Damn it. A sour taste filled her mouth at the thought of her introspection being open to others, least of all this newcomer. The Jedi turned Darth risen far too swiftly the ranks for Hanabi's liking. Even Naruto's own word could only promise so much before she decided to take matters into her own hands. Shut up. Smiling, she banked back towards the fray. Back to the flight, back to the fight, and the exhilarating rush that came with it. For someone who had been controlled by nearly all her life, there could be nothing more intoxicating. How ironic then, that as Naruto's chief enforcer, controlling the lives of others, that she found such freedom. It was a twister mentality, perhaps, but it was hers. Hers. Every second of fear, agony, death only served to sharpen her focus even further. Among other things. Hyper-aware, sensitive to even the slightest ripple in the force, she saw it all. A sight that eclipsed even that of the Byakugan, a sight that showed her car reaching out with his mind and hurling a fighter squadron back to the planet. Fiery comets burning up in the atmosphere, dissolving beneath the barrage. In her mind's eye, even the planetary bombardment seemed a mere candle by comparison, the planet a tiny ember about to be snuffed out, and sorrow. A twinge of emotion from Carr called her attention back to the battle. She felt him then, shining like a beacon through the force of burning supernova of satisfaction. Satisfaction, yes, but also sadness. Sadness and sorrow. He saw the destruction he wrought, and he grieved for it. Kenobi almost found herself comforting him, incredibly. That there was still a part of him, of that Naruto, the one who didn't like to hurt, assuaged her guilt, somewhat. What are you worth? She murmured softly to herself, the things you love or the people you hurt. As if sensing those very words, Carr reached out and touched her, his mind brushing against hers. Kenobi started, a ripple of shock passing through her body. For a heartbeat she felt the entirety of his being brush against hers. His fears. Doubts. Dreams. For a moment, instant, a sliver of eternity. Her hands fell slack on the controls, no longer gripping the yoke. In that tiny pinprick of forever, she thought he was trying to tell her something, seeking validation for his efforts, somehow. She was close, so close to understanding minus. Then the ship shuddered from a direct hit, alarms blaring. His mind closed down, furiously snapping. Focus. Don't think. Feel. Trust your emotions. Let them guide you. Empower you. Snarling, she wheeled, firing. Perhaps it was time to stop. She ceased this silent war against him. What did it matter if he had a child? It mattered a lot. Kenobi felt her face burn slightly at the thought. Insipid as it might sound, she wanted to be a mother. Not just to rebuild the Hyliga, but to have children of her own. Behind you, Seeker. Swearing, she banked hard right, evading a bout of fire from the planetary guns. Seeker. Why did Grievous insist on calling her such? The warrior insisted that it was a term of honor amongst his people, yet even so, she disliked it. Kenobi did not seek. Seeking implied being lost, needing to find something. She had no such need. She knew her place, she told herself, so what need had she for such doubts? Will you cease calling me that? Grievous barked a laugh over the calm, distracting her still further. Still, that flicker of doubt remained, niggling. Sometimes she wondered. We are doing well. Ship's voice intruded briefly on Naruto's thoughts, snapping him out of his introspective daze. Carr nearly cursed himself for it, glowering as the burning cinder of a planet below. He'd come here to make a statement, to pit the Separatists and Republic against one another. So why now did he waver? Why did he feel regret? Carr opened his mouth to reply minus. And froze. He froze. Every fiber of his being, every muscle, every single cell all turned to ice. A small part of him was keenly aware of the rain, the endless, relentless rain of Kamino sputtering against his lightsaber, causing the crimson line to hiss and spark furiously in his grip. That fury was nothing compared to what whom he saw standing before him. Gentle eyes regarded him with cool contempt, the cylinder slowly rising from her belt, and into the line of her palm. When the lightsaber snapped to life, he nearly flinched. I missed you, Naruto-kun. She smiled benevolently, the words at complete contrasts with her expression. It's been such a long time. Carr balked. He was staring at a dead woman. And then she came at him, saber swinging. He blocked, but it was a feint, and his blade passed, spitting through the rain. Somehow, he knew what was coming even before felt the pain. The lightning struck him with tremendous force from behind, causing his body to go weak. Boneless. Raw power thundered over and into his skin, torching, burning and tearing seemingly in vain until finally, he felt the cold rigors of death creep up upon him. His mind slipped and his strength vanished, leaving his flesh scorched and scarred all over. And there, rising over it all, a voice. Why didn't you go to Naboo? And just like that, the vision left him, leaving him blinking. What was that? He wondered. Sir. What? Sir. It took him several minutes to realize he was being hailed, addressed by his admirals. He ignored their hails. Mind still reeling. Naboo. What did Naboo have to do with this? The vision burned like a brand in the back of his mind, demanding attention. The pain he'd felt had been so real, he could still feel the searing burns on his skin, his life slipping away. Naboo. Wasn't Anakin on Naboo? He remembered that much. His spies had been most forthcoming in tracking him after he'd been released. Which meant she was on Naboo as well. She must be. When the idea came, he almost laughed. Almost. Send a message to the fleet. He spoke at last, choosing his words with infinite care. For him to leave the battle without word would be disastrous, therefore, preparations were needed. They are to continue all attacks and bombardment until the planet is glass. I don't want any survivors. The words were numb, cold almost. And you, my lord? The Sith Lord smiled. I'm going to visit an old friend. Naboo. One hyperspace jump later. Anakin felt, rather than saw his Padme's reaction. He's here. Part of him wondered how she knew, but that same small sliver of self slipped away, simpering when the door flung itself open. Ah, and there they are. Naruto seemed wholly at ease, uncaring for the attention garnered by his unexpected visit to Naboo. Each step clicked harshly against the floor, a steady gait carrying him through the palace. Utterly at ease, he seemed like a calm summer breeze, blowing through the room. It was only the dark eddies of power felt through the force that warned Anakin of the older man's intentions. A hand rose, effortlessly raising his mask, exposing a friendly, if deceptive face, his arms spread wide as though to embrace him. Instinctively he stepped forward and to the side, blocking Carr from advancing. Oh, Annie, don't be so rude. We're old friends. Hardly. Padme's face was a study of contrasts. What are you doing here? Why, I've come to give the happy couple my blessing, of course. A pause. Of sorts? Anakin colored. What? Oh, and I may or may not be taking Lady Amidala hostage for the foreseeable future. A gloved hand waved extravagantly, and Anakin felt cold steel pressed against his stomach. He looked down, stunned to find the unyielding muzzle of a blaster pistol pushing into his gut. Well, it's complicated, old chum. The blonde's head bobbed sagely. Reasons. War between the Separatists and the Republic. Lame games. That sort of thing. Say, he paused, cocking his head aside, you don't mind if I borrow her for a bit, do you? Ah, who am I kidding? He laughed then, it was a soft, booming sound, like two boulders scraping together. Of course you don't. You minus. That was Skywalker had time for before the stun bolt took him in the chest. Chapter 14 Awaken. Don't want to rule the entire galaxy. Oh. Well, that's minus. Just a portion of it. Naruto. What? At least I'm honest about it. Awaken. You lost her. If one were to look up misery in the dictionary, Anakin Skywalker fit the bill. The young Padawan looked positively haggard even through the hologram, his eyes were dark, his robes in disarray. Knowing he'd just taken and was still recovering from a high-powered stun bolt to the chest did little to soften Obi-Wan's concern for the boy. It did however temper his worry for Padme abduction at the hands of Kar, albeit only slightly. By his Padawan's own account, the Sith Lord could have easily killed them both, yet instead he'd stunned Anakin, maimed a few guards and made off with the senator to parts unknown. The only question was, why? Darth Kar rarely concerned himself with avoiding casualties in the past, so why the restraint now? Then there was the timing. It smacked of desperation. He himself had only just arrived on Kamino. He was more than a sector away, and in no position to abandon his mission just to come to Anakin's aid. They would have to inform both the Council and Senate of this grave matter naturally. But what could they do? Nothing. Master Yoda would never sanction an all-out assault on the Sith's homeworld, assuming Kar had even taken here they're not with the Separatists threatening war. Not just for one senator, no matter how important she might be. They were, for lack of a better word, borked. How did this happen? Frustrated, he once more asked the younger Jedi for answers. Do you remember anything? Anything at all? A clap of thunder echoed in the clouds overhead, nearly drowning out his Padawan's reply. I don't remember much, Master. Anakin remained penitent, but now a note of anger trickled into his voice. I didn't sense him until was too late. He said something about changing events, then he shot me. A look of dismay etched itself into the young man's face as he continued on. I should have been ready. Furious, he spun away from his master's image, fists clenching at his sides. I should have stopped him. He must be working with those separatists. Calm yourself, Anakin. Lest your emotions get the better of you. We know nothing for certain yet. I'm sorry, Master. It was physically impossible for someone to be more despondent. What should we do? I'm still tracking Jango, but there's nothing you can do over there. I'll give you the coordinates. Come to Kamino at once. He instructed. Behind you. Something compelled him to turn around. Idly, the Jedi Knight's gaze strayed back to the sweeping doors of the complex, narrowing as a young, dark-haired woman stepped through them. Uncaring of the deluge and lacking anything in the way of anything even remotely resembling a coat, she stepped out into the downpour. For a long moment she simply stood there in her dark leathers, gazing blankly at Obi-Wan as the rain soaked her to the bone. Ah, she said softly. Then, all at once she offered a small smile and started in his direction. In that smile, his sixth sense shrilled a warning. I have a bad feeling about this. This was muttered more to himself than his wayward student as the stranger drew closer. But Master Minus. Anakin, listen to me. Biting down on his own ire, Obi-Wan forced himself to take a breath and focus on his student instead of the approaching woman. I am ordering you to come to Kamino. Tell the Council. Do you understand? She was headed right for him. His hand strayed toward the lightsaber at his belt, silently willing the boy to understand the unspoken message to see what was happening. Something hardened in the younger man's eyes. Yes, Master. Despite his Padawan's acquiescence, Kenobi felt a lead weight settle into his stomach. Anakin. Too late. The younger Jedi terminated his call with an audible click. Blast it. Whirling away from his ship, Obi-Wan Kenobi found himself face to face with the mysterious woman. She'd gotten perilously close since he'd last looked. Now, she stood little more than arm's length away. The Force was screaming at him, shrieking furiously at the mere presence of this strange, gorgeous creature. Those eerie, piercing eyes stabbed right through him as if he weren't even there, as though she were looking clear through him and past to the starfighter beyond. And still, she didn't speak. His eyes snapped down and up again in an instant. Saw the cylinder clipped to her waist. Sith spit. When he looked up, that smile was still there, fixed eerily in place as though it were frozen. Lightning flashed across the sky, dancing in those strange, blank eyes. Her head cocked aside, as though she were seeing him once again for the first time. Can I help you? Obi-Wan ventured warily. Unfortunately not. Her voice was soft, almost musical. I was expecting Naruto. That was all he heard before a flash of red cut across his vision. Padme awoke to silk sheets and the sound of distant boot falls. For a terrible fleeting moment, she had no idea where she was. Her mind reeled at this wildly, lost and confused, trying to make the connection between her new surroundings and the stinging, throbbing pain smarting in the back of her head. Where was she? Why did her head hurt? Why couldn't she remember anything? For a terrifying nanosecond she genuinely couldn't remember how she'd gotten here. Then abruptly, the memories came swarming back. A black shadow entering the room. Anakin falling, his body spasming wildly as the stun bolt took him full in the chest. Screams. Shouts. Guards, rushing into the pavilion. The angry hum of a red lightsaber crackling furiously as it deflected each shot, effortlessly returning them to their owners. That eerie mask sweeping in her direction. An invisible vice drawing her forward. Sleep. A negligent wave of the hand, a whisper in her ear, dark and amorphous like a reaper's breath. Then, blackness. The senator had expected it to end there, prepared herself for death. And yet here she was. Alive. Awake. In a bed no less. It was a rather odd thing to wake to, all things considered. Given Carr's reputation, she'd half expected to find herself trussed up in chains and strapped into an interrogation chair. Instead, her eyes fluttered open to find her hands and feet completely unbound, her body wrapped not in spikes or chains, but in a fine silk robe. Wait. Padme started up with an audible gasp, unable to recognize the bright, auburn-colored room in which she found herself nor the black shift draping her body. Her heart did a spiraling backflip in tandem with her mind as she realized something else. She certainly hadn't been wearing this earlier. Mind scrambling, the senator all but threw herself out of bed. Bare feet struck a floor that felt oddly warm, as though heated from within. Strange. The window beyond offered even less answers for where she'd awoken. Outside, she saw only dense tropical foliage and what looked like a lake at the edge. A starfighter shrieked through the sky overhead, howling by with a distant, yet furious whine. Well, she certainly wouldn't be finding an escape this way. Spinning about, the once former queen considered her options. There were none. All that awaited her was four walls and ceiling. No door. Nothing beyond the window, which she was doubtlessly not strong enough to break. The room itself afforded precious little in the way of possessions, but oddly enough a small holdout blaster was waiting for her on a nearby dresser. After a moment's hesitation, Padme picked it up. Inspecting the power cell confirmed it housed a single shot. Maybe enough to blast open the window. Enough to surprise whomever came to get her, certainly. If they came to get her. She shuddered to think what other darker purpose this blaster might serve. Were they going to leave her here to starve, force her to take her own life? Or perhaps it was there just to show how powerless she really was. As if summoned by that very thought, however, the wall slid open with a soft chime. Startled, the senator scrambled for the weapon's safety. Statement: "Oh, please do try, meatbag." A metallic, warbling voice chilled her to the bone as the door finished cycling. "I haven't disintegrated anyone today." Waiting for her was a hunter-killer droid, nearly bronze-orange and looking like it was in dire need of a good cleaning. Nevertheless it still functioned, its red photoreceptors fixed on her intently, its body whirring slightly as it stepped forward. Padme couldn't help but balk at it. How did this thing even function? It was positively ancient by today's standards. The weapon in its hands, however, was not. Who are you?" she managed. "Ah. Addendum," it continued in its strange warbling voice, "how rude of me. I am HK-47. The Master's personal hunter-killer droid. He humbly asks your immediate presence in his sanctuary, Lady Meatbag." HK-47's unique facial construction made it impossible to smile, but the droid sounded positively smug. Suggestion: "You should hurry. He doesn't like to be kept waiting." Steeling herself, the senator stood and slowly stepped into the hall. "Let's not keep him waiting then." "Damn," the droid complained. "And here I was hoping you would resist. So sorry to disappoint." Instead of the long hallway decorated with blue and red insignia as she'd expected, a large hangar awaited Padme as she emerged from the confines of her cell. The sight of it snatched up her words and threw them into the winds. Every craft possibly imaginable lay scattered out before her, some in varying stages of repair, others refueling for takeoff. And among them, men and women in black robes swept past. It struck her as oddly quiet for a hangar, everyone moving amidst what sounded like a strange sound of something being struck repeatedly. One of the robed individuals glanced in her direction. Yellow eyes met hers and the senator shuddered. "This way," HK instructed, marching stiffly down in an eastern corridor. Padme was all too happy to follow. Before long she found herself in an open enclosure. The dark, granite halls giving way to bright orange tapestries and open slanted windows. HK-47 led her past a row of soldiers, stiff at attention, their helmeted heads refusing to so much as glance in their direction. Their captain was another matter. The polished metal of her helmet jerked angrily in Padme's direction the moment she was past. Even then the senator could easily feel the eyes beneath the helmet boring a hole into her as if she'd committed a grievous sin of some sort. "Keep an eye on her, droid," a crisp, clean voice issued forth, calling at their backs. "And see that she doesn't get loose like the last one." If it was possible for a droid to bristle, HK did. "As you say, meatbag Phasma." Gradually, the strange rhythmic slapping of blows meeting flesh grew louder until finally, they entered an even larger room. Here the walls and ceiling consisted of black marble, the floor padded for some peculiar reason. She soon saw why. Carr stood across from her, unmasked, flanked by what she could only assume were three of his acolytes. She distantly recognized one as a Twi'lek, the other, a Zabrak. The third wore some strange sort of helmet that sheltered their identity. Each wore dark robes mirroring those of their master, each tailored or altered in some way to their unique physiology. She noted each as HK led her to a lone table and bade her sit. Her eyes never left the cloaked individuals. Not a once. At some unseen command, the trio surged forward. The first lashed out with a bolt of lightning, easily caught and redirected by Carr. By then, the second had closed with him. The Sith Lord stepped back and moved with the punch, riding the blow to its penultimate destination. Only then did she realize they'd never struck him at all. The woman's clenched fist shot past, leaving his whiskered cheek wholly unharmed, unmarked. In the next instant said apprentice was on the ground, sprawled on her back. Carr hadn't moved a muscle, and Padme shuddered for it. Knowing of the Force was one thing, seeing such a direct application of it chilled her to the bone. Out of anger, or perhaps sheer frustration, one of the remaining acolytes reached for their belt. Carr's unmasked face snapped towards the responsible party, teeth flashing in a wild grin. None of that. It was like watching a giant hand sweep out of nowhere. One moment the Zabrak stood upright, igniting his weapon, then the hand of an angry god swatted him across the room as if he were no more than a mere fly in the eyes his adversary. Judging by the jarring crunch of bone and labored breathing that followed, he wouldn't be getting up again anytime soon. A hard boot to the ribs drove the last of his sparring partners to their knees, and another kept them there until they croaked out a yield. Panting quietly, Carr stepped back, waved a hand, and someone brought a pitcher of water to him. The blonde downed it in a single gasp and reclaimed his robes shortly thereafter, donning his mask in turn. Only then did he notice Padme. "Ah, good morning." In a single sweeping motion, he reached her and pulled out a chair for himself. "Good job on the no disintegrating, HK. As you say, master. Say, why don't you try to disintegrate Brood again? I'm sure she could use the practice." HK made a noise that, to Padme's ears, sounded like bliss. "Oh, happy day. This is why I enjoy working with you, master. You always know how to keep the meatbags in their place." Spinning on one heel, the hunter-killer droid happily marched off, leaving them alone. Silence reigned. "So, how are we?" he asked. Padme scowled. "You kidnapped me." Yes, terrible business that," Carr admitted, moving in his seat. I had intended to talk with you on Naboo, but your escort complicated matters. You have my sincerest apologies, Your Majesty. I think this works out much better. Please, don't call me that. Once royalty, always royalty, says the Sith. Padme refused to rise to the bait. When you base your expectations only on what you see, you blind yourself to the possibilities of a new reality. Nature is constantly changing. He twirled his hand lazily, a small current of air circling in his palm. Like the wind. His hooded head tilted, ever so slightly, regarding her through the slit of his mask. Are you afraid of change, Senator? Change. She bristled at the insinuation. This isn't. What you're doing isn't change. You want to control everything. I don't want to rule the entire galaxy. Carr replied demurely, raising the glass to his lips. That's nonsense. Only a fool would stretch himself so thin. So no, I do not want to rule the entire galaxy, thank you very much. Padme actually blinked at that, finding herself taken aback. Given everything she'd heard, she'd expected, well, more. The Sith were vicious, evil creatures, feared throughout the galaxy. The idea that this particular Sith was different seemed ludicrous. Even Annie's words hadn't been enough to dull her suspicions on the matter. Yet here he was, calm, civil, outright sane. Oh, well, that's minus. Just a portion of it. Carr amended swiftly. And there went sanity. Padme promptly spat out her tea, the hot liquid gushing forth from her lips to splatter towards the Dark Lord's face. Yellow eyes narrowed. Before she could so much as regret her action, the liquid froze, gelling neatly between them. A flick of the fingers pulled it to his mouth. It's a waste to spill tea. Madman. What? At least I'm honest about it. You're a monster, she accused. Naruto blinked. Then, incredibly, he lifted his mask and laughed. Wherever did you get the impression that I'm a good guy? The smile slipped from his face like water, revealing a decidedly bleak smile beneath. Above all, I endure. I make the hard decisions, the choice no one else will make, so no one else has to. I sacrifice. If they call me a villain, then so be it, but I aim to do a damn better job than the rest. I have awoken and nothing, no one, not you, not the Senate, nor the Sith is going to stand in my way. You can't possibly minus. Naruto's grin would have put a rancor to shame. I have my ways, Lady Senator. Chapter 15, A Sith Holiday Special. We have achieved orbit around the planet, and await any further orders, my lord. Very good, Commander. You are to hold here and bring the prisoner to me. Words echoed on into silence. Drew a slow blink. My lord. Commander Irv Lekov willed himself not to fidget in place, but even so, he remained uncertain of what else to say to the silent Sith. What should he say? He keenly felt all eyes upon him, the entire bridge watching and eagerly anticipating the answer that would follow. His men were watching. Carr's apprentices, the acolytes, all of them were watching and awaiting the outcome. Whether that outcome would end in a sudden death, or a resounding triumph on his part, well, that remained to be seen. Perhaps, if he was lucky, he'd yet see the wisdom in this strategy. If not, I wouldn't poke a sleeping dragon, were I you. A soft voice intoned before he could think to intrude for a second time. He's liable to bite when he's like this. Spirits. Lekov started a bit. No, not spirits. Just me. Rounding on the voice, he found himself mildly alarmed to realize one of Carr's apprentices, Ventress, he recalled after a moment, had gotten the drop on him. Even in the wan lighting, her pale skin seemed to stand out, drawing the eye to her, the pale curtain of her tresses. Those tight, form-fitting thin robes tempting one's gaze, simultaneously offering both quiet temptation and dire warnings for those who dared to act on them. Carr he could understand, as he did Lady Sakura. As a former Jedi, she at least held a bit of practicality and could be predicted. But the Night Sister honestly scared the living daylights out of him sometimes. Still, she was more mild than most, though. Not like the Seeker, Kenobi. That one had a mean streak as long as her lightsaber, and she could be downright vicious. What's wrong, Commander? Ventress Pre, you look like you've seen a ghost. Ventress, behave. Vela lightly swatted the Night Sister on her shoulder. You're scaring him. Good. The pale woman sulked. Car's too soft. The troops need a little fear every now and then. The Twi'lek saw Lekov's tense look and sighed. I'm sorry, she apologized with a warm smile. She's been like this for the last month, you see, and she's due any day now minus. Ventress colored. Don't tell him that. Despite his own anxieties, Lekov found himself repressing a small smile. Still smiling, he bowed deeply. Your secret is safe with me, my lady. It had better be. To think, he'd be trading barbs with a pair of Darksiders on this battle station. For all the myth and rumor about them, Kar's acolytes weren't always the murdering sycophants most thought them to be. Even Lord Grievous, a terrifying warrior, a Jedi killer in his own right, was downright honorable on and off the battlefield despite his fearsome reputation. They brought order and stability in their wake, by any means. If these so-called Sith possessed more resolve than the weak-willed Jedi, then Lekov believed the galaxy needed more of them. Many more. Thankfully, Kar seemed to have that matter well in hand. The idea of so many young ones coming into the world warmed his heart. Their childhood wouldn't be like his. If they were anything like their father, those children would grow to make the galaxy a better place. They would do what must be done. They would not hesitate. They would know mercy, but not be limited by it either. They would succeed their father in every way. It would be a grand world indeed. Indeed, Dark Lord had given him more than a fair bit of leeway since that first fateful promotion. It seemed so long ago since then, that single selfless act ushering him up the chain of command. Kar was a man who would never ask a subordinate to something he wouldn't himself. Since then he'd risen on merit and skill of his own making as much as the Sith's favor, but who knew how far that one kindness extended? Kar was as infamous for his generosity and clever strategies as he was his mercurial temper. If his master was in a foul mood, one never knew what might set him off. Reluctantly, Lekov relayed the orders he'd been given and stood at attention, awaiting further instruction. And while he waited, contemplated the events that had led him here to this pivotal moment. To command the Death Star itself. Having been launched up the chain of command thrice in as many months, he'd had to adapt rapidly to his new post. And with that had come a strange sort of calm. He might not be an admiral like some, but unlike his peers, he held command of the world's foremost space station. He needed no further rank, indeed, he did not desire one. His abrupt rise to power had already made him more enemies than friends, and sometimes he suspected he only still lived because of Kar's blatant interest in his career. Most considered him something of a maverick, someone who didn't belong in their circles. That didn't bother Lekov. On the contrary, he welcomed the descent. It kept him grounded. The best engineers in the galaxy had come together to make this marvel, and it was his to command. His. By regards, the Death Star was a modern miracle, a true feat of engineering. A space station capable of wiping out entire planets in a single blast. They were the first to harness such power, and if the Darth had his way, quite possibly the last. And he was in charge of it all. It was humbling to be given command of such an important post. With great power came great responsibility, and he resolved to make certain it wasn't wasted. A weapon like this would do more than just bring peace and stability to the galaxy. It would serve as a deterrent. A reminder to what would happen to those who craved war and spread deceit. The mere presence of this battle station, its very reputation, would be more imposing than anything the Republic, or the soon-to-be separatists, could muster. Someone's you needed to speak softly and carry a big stick. Now he had only to wait for the order. Darth Kar seemed to loom over the bridge like a living shadow. Silent and immovable. His masked face reflected nothing, no emotion, no outward signs of concern. The only indication that he'd heard him at all came in the slight twitch of his right hand. Those firm, black, gloved fingers curled inward, and for a fleeting moment Lekov felt an irrational flicker of fear, wondering if it had all been a ruse. If he would finally feel that tight vice across his throat, as so many others before him had. Would it be quick, or slow, an agonizing descent into death, or perhaps minus? As if sensing his disquiet, that masked slit turned towards him. What can you tell me about this planet, Lekov? Caught off guard by the sudden inquiry and its sheer informality, the commander stiffened. My lord? Carr sighed patiently. The planet. Tell me about it. This is Coruscant, the capital of the Republic and home to the Galactic Senate as well as the Jedi Council. Lekov cited it off from sheer Rhoda. The entire planet is one giant city. At the sixth measuring gaze, he hastened onward, citing what he remembered about the ancient planet. The outlying moons of this system are used for storage of garbage canisters transported there. They're mostly uninhabited, as I recall. At length, his head tilted a fraction of an inch in what Lekov could only assume was a nod. And do you know why we are here? Ah. That much he did know. Hopefully. To set an example, sir. Of a sort, yes. Carr replied with faux humor, folding both arms across his lightly armored chest. We're also here to celebrate. Apparently, he'd been wrong. Celebrate. Yes, celebrate. The man's voice grew animated behind his stoic helm, his hands gesturing wild. Do you not know what day it is? No. Never mind, he waved a hand, cutting the commander off. I forget you're not from my planet. Where I'm from, we have something called Christmas. It's an incredible day, let me tell you. I can't believe more of you don't honor it. Ventress sighed softly. Here we go again. Hush, you. Spinning away from the bemused Nightsister, the Dock Lord turned to face Lekov. It's a bit of a holiday tradition on my planet. He explained at length, dismissing the man's quiet confusion with a laugh. I haven't had cause to celebrate it in. How long? Well, nearly a year now, actually, so let's just say a while. But this year I'm feeling festive. So, after our little test, we're going to minus. The doors to the bridge rushed open before he could finish, and all eyes turned towards the sound. Reporting with the prisoner, as ordered. Carr found himself momentarily nonplussed to realize it wasn't one of his inquisitors shepherding Senator Amidala to the bridge, but rather Captain Phasma and two of her handpicked men. He was further displeased to see the ugly black bruise on said senator's face and the blaster burn on her shoulder. An ugly knot of anger coiled inside of him. He hadn't given them orders to harm here, but apparently someone had been overeager. Eager enough to shoot, not stun. At least she bore her injuries with pride and distinction, as one might expect from a former member of royalty. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed, hung in disarray around her face, a sharp and sure sign of her attempted flight. It was such a pity too. Without those flaws, she would have looked positively regal in the pristine gray dress he'd procured for her. She still did even. Very good, Captain. Ah, and here is the guest of honor. So glad you could join us. Padme Amidala bristled slightly. It wasn't by choice, I assure you. Oh, you wound me, Senator. Golden eyes slid downward towards her bruised face, then drifted to her injured arm. Captain, I believe I told you not to harm our guest. Phasma must have seen that dark glimmer in his eyes too, because the normally stoic soldier took a sharp step back at his mild rebuke. My apologies. She deferred, bowing her head. One of my men was a bit enthusiastic in capturing her. And why did he have to capture her? I was under the impression she was secure in her quarters. We caught her sending a message to the planet, my lord. One of the guards informed him sheepishly, quailing when the sixth masked face snapped towards him. I don't know how she escaped her cell. Ah. I take it you're the one responsible then? Sith eyes locked upon him. I am, sir. Carr clasped both hands behind his back, fixing the embarrassed soldier with his most lethal glare. Blasters have a stun setting for this very reason, you know. But she was just a prisoner. It was entirely the wrong thing to say. Just a prisoner, you say? No, you nothing. The entire room seemed to step back as one as the hapless trooper looked on, his head snapping to and fro, searching for allies and finding none. Even Padme herself was quick to distance herself from the foolish man, not knowing what was coming, but wanting to be well clear of any backlash all the same. Because Darth Karr had brought the full weight of his gaze down upon the unfortunate soldier, and was even now raising an arm in his direction, fingers splayed. Seeing this, the trooper stumbled back, seeking refuge where none was to be had. Realizing his folly, he turned to run, attempting to flee the bridge altogether. Karr wasn't having any of it. A low hiss snaked between the mask, modulated to a darkened degree. I find your lack of faith disturbing. In the next instant, forks of jagged azure lightning sprang from the Sith's raised fingertips. Ark! The trooper spasmed wildly as the blistering current struck him head-on, his entire body convulsing against the Sith Lord's anger. A shrill scream pierced the air while he writhed, forcing Padme to avert her eyes lest she watch the armored man cook beneath the deluge. Though his helmet hid his face, his voice carried more pain than any expression could ever convey. Steam rose from his pristine armor, slowly beginning to melt metal even as it warmed the flesh beneath, sending the trooper into a fresh fit of agony. And then, incredibly, the torrent ceased, leaving him to drop to the floor in a smoldering heap. It had lasted for merely a moment, a split second of discharge, but it was enough. The bridge fell silent. Check him, Karr commanded. Phasma warily did as she was bade, touching 2 fingers to the man's neck. He lives. Good. Can you hear me, trooper? A low moan answered. We do not abuse our prisoners, nor do we execute them without cause. The penitent Darth instructed the groaning soldier, those eerie golden eyes never once leaving his broken body. We are the new Sith. Not the old. We are better than this. Scoffing, he turned his back on the man. Phasma. Dump him in a Bacta tank, and see that this doesn't happen again. Why yes sir. Now then, Karr continued without missing a beat, Lady Amidala. If I were a villain, I suppose I'd be monologuing right about now about how pointless your efforts were. The Sith surprised her with a dry laugh. But as I'm not, I'll let you slide with a warning. Thus saying, he stepped forward. Bad girl. Don't do it again. And slapped her on the wrist. Padme blinked. Once. Twice. 3 times. You can't be serious. Oh, I can be when I want to, Karr reassured her in a conspiratorial whisper. But since you were oh so kind enough to play right into my hand, I'll be honest with you. I wanted you to send that message. Now all of Coruscant knows what's about to happen. I couldn't ask for a better stage. A stage for what? You'll see. Naruto soothed, ushering her forward to the viewport where the others waited. First things first. Let me see your arm. Padme hissed in quiet pain as he forced her to extend it, but only for a moment. As she looked on, the Sith laid a gloved hand upon her. And the pain vanished. The searing injury that had so tormented her for the last hour now was suddenly a dull ache, then not even that. As she looked on in quiet disbelief, he cradled her bruised cheek with the other, almost cupping it. Once again, the pain faded to nothingness. Had she possessed a mirror, she would have seen the bruise shrivel away, the painful mark slowly regaining the full flesh of clear, healthy skin. There. Karr prend. Much better. Show off. Ventress groused. Hush. Vela soothed. Do you know the purpose of this battle station, Senator? Karr inquired as Padme idly rubbed her face and inspected her newly healed limb. Do you know why I brought you here? No, she admitted. This is the Death Star. The Sith informed her coldly. Not what I'd choose for a name, but there you are. It's a planet killer, originally of Geonosian design. And we've come here to Coruscant. Naruto inhaled slowly and exhaled, gazing down at the glittering blue planet through the viewport in quiet contemplation. From here it looked utterly harmless, a small ball of azure interposed with glittering gold lines amidst the blue, each line a city, each flickering artery a hub of galactic trade and commerce, drifting among the stars in comparative quiet. At least it had been until they dropped out of hyperspace and entered the system. Even now he could feel the fear of millions billions of races rising up from the depths, terror and confusion made manifest as they struggled to understand what was happening. Savoring the intense rush of raw emotion, he returned his attention to Lekov, still waiting patiently after all this time. "Prepare to destroy the planet, Commander," he declared. Lekov saluted. "Begin charging the reactor." Padden's gaze snapped to the viewport as she realized what he intended. "You can't." Carr's mask remained as emotionless as his voice. "Can I not?" he remarked dryly. "You have no power here, Senator. You're merely here to observe and report. That is your only purpose." Desperate, she clutched at the Dark Lord's armor, drawing a pointed look from the masked warrior. "Please. Don't." She begged. "I'll do anything." He actually seemed to consider that for a moment. "I suspect you would. But no, I'm afraid I won't take you up on your offer." "Then why bring me here at all?" she demanded, looking on in muted horror as technicians bustled to their stations. "The Republic is vital minus. And unnecessary," Naruto interjected ruthlessly. "Corrupt and dogmatic, unknowingly serving a Sith Lord. Sure, I may not be the nicest person, but at least I'm honest about it. Better to wipe it clean and start over." "You're a monster." Remarkably, he found he couldn't bring himself to countermand her on that. Rather, he found he couldn't speak. Nor was he expected to, for that matter, until the reactor was made ready. The entire bridge would wait until the end of time if he ordered it. After all, they feared his wrath too much to dare defy his wishes. Fear was fine, of course, but a touch of respect was always something to be envied. Such was the purpose of this little test. How odd that he'd chosen this as the weapon's first test. Those Genocians implemented such clever designs. It was almost a shame he hadn't liberated them earlier. But taken them he had, and now, after so long in dry dock, it was time to unveil his masterpiece. Nothing in the Republic nor the Separatist fleet could possibly stand up to this, and that, he supposed, was the point. If he wanted, he could simply fire on Coruscant at this, be rid of the Jedi and Sidious in one fell swoop. A swift and easy victory. A certain death. Almost too easy. Naruto Carr didn't do easy. An easy death meant a quick one, and when you were quick, your enemy didn't have time to suffer. No, the Republic and the Separatists didn't deserve a quick, sudden death. In his anger, he'd given one to Dooku. A mistake. He didn't suffer. Their end would be much slower, far more satisfying. It would. Amusing to see how the galaxy reacted to this at large. "Reactor charged at full power, sir," a technician dutifully informed him. Naruto nodded. "You may fire when ready." A sharp salute followed. Initiating countdown. The time for jokes had ended. There would be no more witty words on his part. Gone was the time for diplomacy, the hallmark of negotiation and compromise. Now the fate of the galaxy would be decided by blades and blasters. He almost wished it hadn't come to this. He took no pleasure in what he was about to do, but he did was necessary. Not just for himself, but for everyone. If they branded him a villain for it, then so be it. If he was to be made out as madman to future generations, named a heretic and tyrant and betrayer, so be it. He did what he had to, even if he hated himself. For the greater good of all the worlds. Quietly, sternly, he exhaled. "On my command." Silence followed. A hand rose. And then, it fell. Fire. Moments later, a flash of green lit up the viewport. In a sense, it was like watching a gigantic lightsaber ignite. Streams of jade and verdant green colliding at different angles to form a single piercing column of jade. Through the force he felt the fierce spike as the roaring gathered. Coalesced into one. A peerless energy that no man could ever hope to match, much less muster, channeled by the flawless precision of Genocian technology. Pushed past the point of no return, These energies held forward in a single heavenly lance that streaked out across the system, across the cosmos, and missed Coruscant. Instead, Senator Amidala looked on in disbelief as it streaked past the city planet and violently struck one of the nearby moons, vaporizing it in a cloud of dust and debris. It was a very nice explosion, Carr mused, just the sort to herald the holidays and scare the wits out of the entire galaxy. He'd achieved his goal without taking a single life. On the planet below, he felt the Coruscanti people's fear intensify, their terror made manifest as they watched the moon implode from the sky, thousands of harmless comets streaking through the atmosphere. Carr, for his part, merely chortled softly, "Merry Christmas, you filthy animals." He felt Padden's eyes burn a hole into his back, and his laughter redoubled. You were never going to destroy the planet, were you?" "No, I wasn't," Carr replied glibly. "The rod is a useful tool, but it isn't always necessary." Turning from the viewport and the spinning debris, he lifted his mask for her, exposing bright eyes and a sly smile. "I could have used a single reactor and rained havoc on the planet, but I didn't do that either. This was merely meant to be a message of what I can and might do. Chaos, greed, hate, darkness, hope, wisdom, altruism, light. We all have these within us. It's simply a matter of choice. But enough about that. Time for presents." "Presents." Yellow eyes shone like poisoned honey. "Did I stutter? And you, Senator, are going to be my personal guest." Padme gulped. "I don't suppose I have a choice." "Not at all. All right, everyone. We're off to Coruscant." "Wait a second, I thought the Sith frowned on the practice of Life Day minus." "Yeah, fuck that. It's Christmas. Presents for all. Jedi and Sith alike. Everyone." With a flourish of his cape, the Darth turned and departed, striding from the viewport, taking his retina with him. After a moment's hesitation, Padme followed in his wake. Uncertain of what, if anything, she should do. She didn't know how to respond to this. Just now, he'd had a chance to wipe out billions of lives. Yet he deliberately stayed his hand, opting for a simple show of raw military might, rather than outright annihilation. Did that make him good? Evil? Or something in between? She didn't know. What she did know was that there, for a moment, when she'd grabbed him, he'd hesitated. Was this because of her actions? Had he listened to her? Might she yet persuade him? Perhaps if she stayed, she might yet be able to influence him still further. Guide him down a gentler path. Perhaps. Ah, how little she knew. Wait, are we actually going down to the planet? Of course we are. Better men have tried, and failed to kill me year-round. Today will be no different. Padme still failed to see the logic in this. You do know they're likely to attack you if we leave the station. Naruto grinned. Attack me? Why ever would they do that? I'm here to discuss peace talks with Naboo on your behest. Amidala opened her mouth to refute such a claim. And promptly closed it. The Senate might actually believe that. Clever bastard. Clapping his hands, Darth Carr strode from the bridge, cackling all the way. Happy holidays to all, he declared merrily. Now. None saw the fell twinkle in those golden eyes. Let the celebrations begin. Chapter 16, A Man of Many Masks. Several months earlier. Lost. He was lost. Abandoned by his master. Forsaken. Defeated. Cast adrift, and left to rot amidst the ravages of time like so much refuse. The depths he'd gone through to survive would turn the stomach of lesser creatures. Forced to crawl in the dark, to slink and scrounge and scavenge and scrape, and scratch and scrape and snarl and slice. The world may have forgotten him, but he refused to forget it, and what it had done to him. Days passed. Weeks. Months. Years. Still he lingered on in spite of his madness, clinging to life fueled by a singular emotion. Hatred. A wise man once called rage a hell of an anesthetic. Truer words have never been spoken. Emotions are a powerful force. They can be both light or dark, used for good or ill. The will to live is a mighty thing indeed, surpassing flesh and bone, a strength of spirit seldom seen in but a few souls. How long had he known this emotion? How long had he been trapped with this burning fire trapped in his chest, this searing inferno of wrath and spite? Fire in his chest. Fire in his legs. No. Not his legs. His legs were gone. Gone, gone, gone. Taken. Stolen from him. It seemed like an eternity now. All because of him. 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 Kenobi. Jedi scum. This was all his fault. Once he had known greatness. Once, the galaxy trembled at his name. Once he had been destined for so much. More than this. It seemed so long ago now. So long since he'd first stood upon the precipice of glory and infamy only to have his dreams dashed at the last instant. Or was this all a dream? An illusion? A fever dream brought on by his shattered psyche? Brought on by that wretched Jedi who'd stolen his destiny, his strength, his glory, his everything, a thief. Sometimes in rare moments of clarity, he wondered if that was all this was. A dream. Perhaps he was still trapped in that pit. Perhaps this place was the pit, the darkness in which he lay merely another form of madness. Perhaps not. Kenobi. Even now he could somehow still feel his presence, so close, so close. He could see him in his mind's eye, so close now, but just out of reach, like his memories. Yes, reach. His mind flailed at the thought, struggling to grasp broken splinters of memory. Remember. For a fleeting instant he grasped the truth in his hands and remembered, recalled encountering someone in that bleak trash heap. A man wearing a mask. A voice like rolling thunder, confident, proud and filled with purpose. He had been confronted by him, but now he wondered if that too was a dream. Perhaps it would be best to let go of his hatred and simply slip away. No, 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 someone spoke suddenly in the black, laughing in its soothing, dulcet tones. We can't have you thinking that, Maul. Maul. The mere mention of his name sent the Sith's already fractured mind into paroxysms of pure agony, leaving him clutching at his horns to writhe painfully upon the floor. His name. Simply recalling his identity threatened to shatter him so utterly that he would never recover, yet still he held on, clinging to the scraps of his sanity with dogged determination. Yes. He remembered now, in spite of the pain, in spite of the madness that sought to claw it all away from him. Hatred had kept his spirit intact, even as his body came apart. Yet he was lost, and became a rabid animal. He had been apprenticed to the most powerful being in the galaxy. Destined for greatness, for glory, for so much more than this. Yes. The voice reminded him. Such is how I found you. Discarded. Forgotten. Reality upended itself in an instant, the darkness of his surroundings burned away by cleansing fire. The inferno writhed and twisted before the Sith now, tongues of orange and yellow acquiring shape and form. That of a man. An ethereal figure cloaked in fire and garbed in crimson armor emerged from within, sheathed in dark light. Could light be dark? Maul thought perhaps it might as he gazed into that cold facade. A faceless mask conveying no emotion, an empty void lending no hints to the entity within. Nothing at all. TCH. Look what has become of you. A rolling voice akin to that of a slow-moving avalanche ground against the bleak agony of his madness anew, dripping with scorn. A rat, trapped in a maze of your own making. You were great once. A peerless warrior, a hunter beyond compare. You were strong. You were feared. Your loyalty was absolute, and what did it get you? The speaker paused, considering. Well, I suppose we both know the answer. Now, for the finishing touches. Before Maul could even hope to fathom a response, the ghostly figure thrust 2 fingers against his tattooed forehead and uttered a single command. Rise. Fire filled his being, driving him from his dark dreams and back to the waking world with a howl. His body was already moving as he came back to himself, jerking upright even as frigid air rushed through his lungs in an angry, pained breath. Someone tried to steady him from behind, but Maul shook them off with a vicious force push, disgusted by his own weakness. Already his vision was beginning to clear, the room that once swam in a sea of cold gray and muted black gradually gaining focus and clarity while his senses swam in a storm-tossed sea. For the first time in an age, Maul found that he could think. Not just think, but speak. As if someone had thrust a scalding iron against his temples, burning away that madness, yet leaving his mind whole, intact. When he dared look down, he found that impossible truth to be true. Absurd? He surely remembered losing his legs to Kenobi's blade, and yet when he looked down there they were unharmed. Any suspicion of them being false or prosthetic vanished as he realized he could feel them, not just with his body, but the force as well. Ah, how long it had been since he'd felt his old strength. Now, vengeance would surely be his. Kenobi. The dark side sang at the memory of his anger and flooded him with power, heightening his aggression. Stumbling, he forced himself to his feet, struggling to get his bearings. Someone had gone to great lengths to restore his clothes, but the tearing pain in his lower torso warned him that despite the miracle of retaining his legs, he wasn't yet fully healed. A medical droid stood opposite him, now rendered little more than scrap at his outburst. Beyond that, the lack of familiarity in his surroundings only served to further aggravate him, further exacerbating the weakness of his body. It would be many months yet before he could fully wield his raw power as he once had, and the notion galled him. Less so than what happened next. Welcome back. The voice came from behind as portion of the wall inexplicably parted, revealing the masked man from his dreams. Maul was afforded but the briefest glimpse of the well-lit hall beyond before the door whooshed shut behind the newcomer, trapping them in the room together. A beat of irritating silence passed as they regarded one another, one crouched in weakness, the other standing tall and proud over him, hands clasped behind his back. At length one spoke. "Enjoying your legs?" Instinct compelled Maul to lash out. He never made it. An unseen vice locked around his throat, stalling his assault and crushing him to the wall before he could take a single step. As if the hand of an angry god had reached down from the heavens and struck him, so too did he find himself made powerless by the assault. Even as he struggled against it, the invisible hand crushed him deeper into the metal, choking the very life from his lungs. "Irk. Do not mistake my hospitality for weakness," the man in the mask warned, his voice sharper than any blade. "You are a guest in my home at my discretion, and I will not tolerate violence." His threat issued, he raised his gaze a fraction of an inch, a short gesture, and the vice around Maul's throat slackened just a hair, allowing him to suck in a much-needed breath. Strangling a snarl, he cast a rueful glower at his host. Or was it his captor? Regardless, they'd proven their power to checkmate him without lifting a finger. Even though part of him yearned to lash out, he held himself in check. "Who are you?" The entity responded with a question of his own. "Who I am is unimportant at the moment. What do you want?" The question nearly floored Maul. Not once in his life had anyone bothered to ask him what he wanted. It was never a question he had paused to consider, for that matter. There had only been his master's will. Yet his master had abandoned him, left his mind and body both to rot. Any loyalty he might have felt to Sidious had long since withered within him as his hatred grew like an old gnarled root. Hatred for his master, for Kenobi, for the galaxy itself, all those who had cast him into that pit and brought him to the brink of sanity. What did he want? Kenobi to suffer, certainly. But beyond that, what did he truly desire? "I won't speak to a man in a mask," he retaliated, baring his teeth. "Show your face or leave me be." Once more Maul felt firsthand the regard of that gaze settle upon him. Like a crushing wave, an endless ocean ready to smother him at any moment. Glacial anger burned behind the mask, threatening to snuff him out before he could draw a single breath. Still, he refused to yield. Never again. Not to the Jedi, not the master who had abandoned him, and certainly not to a man who hid his face. Thus it came as something of a surprise when his masked benefactor actually acquiesced to his request. "As you wish." A gloved hand rose and fell with a soft hiss of steam, the scarred mask parted, revealing a pair of burning golden orbs set in a pale, whiskered visage. Despite himself, Maul bristled. Those were undoubtedly the eyes of one who commanded great power in the dark side. Eyes that had experienced immense pain, hatred, and wrath. As if beckoned by that very thought, he finally found he could sense the unmasked man in the Force, see him standing within its burning depths, burning like a dark sun. As though a veil had been torn aside and only now his eyes could see, revealing the endless depths beyond. Slowly, painfully, the Zabrak forced himself into an upright position, willed his battered body to stand. To his credit, his fellow warrior made no move to stop him. Gold met gold, and neither moved. "You are Sith." Maul knew these words to be true the moment he uttered them. No Jedi would embrace the darkness so utterly. Of a sort. White teeth flashed in a rictus of a grin. "Not the kind you're used to, I imagine. I am Kar. Formerly known as Na." "No," he paused and bit off the word, shaking his head. "That name has no meaning here. You may call that, if you wish. Come. We have much to discuss." Without further ado, the Darth turned and pressed a gloved hand against the wall, creating an opening which he promptly stepped into. Once more Darth Maul was granted a glimpse of the hall beyond. This time, however, the passageway remained open, and he found himself facing two armed guards. Each had a crimson lightsaber to his throat before he could draw a breath. Impudence? Irate, he bared his fangs. It was only Kar's word that stilled them. "That won't be necessary." The Sith's voice echoed from the hall. "Our guest does not require an escort." Once more those golden eyes found his. "Walk with me." It was not a request. After a moment's hesitation, Maul followed. It required a physical effort on his part not to limp and favor his right side. Sheer pride prevented him from showing such humiliating weakness. Resolute, he kept his pace firm and matched Kar stride for stride in the face of his pain, refusing to cower. "Not today. Never again. If you think this show of force will intimidate me." "Force?" Kar frowned at him over his shoulder. "No, this isn't a show of force by any means. I saved you because I have need of you and your skills. You are a valued guest, and will not be harmed unless you give me reason to harm you. Make of it what you will." "How so?" "I'll admit you've become something of a curiosity for me, these last few months." The Sith Lord confessed with a faint smile, folding his arms across his armored chest, lending himself the vaguest impressions of pride as he effortlessly glided through the hall. "An experiment, now successful. I wanted to test the depths of my strength to see if it were possible to restore your body and mind with my power alone. Turns out I was able to do just that. When I learned about you, I had to see for myself. A man who survived being cut in half, sustained by will alone. What would he be like, I wondered? Imagine my surprise when I found out you hated the Jedi just as much as I do. I think we're going to get along just fine." A beat of silence passed between them, broken only by the faint sound of their boots striking the ground. "I have no desire to be your slave." Maul scowled. "Take your honeyed words elsewhere. I don't want a slave." Kar replied eloquently. "Rather, I seek an ally." "Continue." "Happily. But first, why don't you tell me how you survived? I've seen your memories, of course, but I wish to hear it from you. Please enlighten me." "My hatred kept my spirit intact even though my body was not. And yet, I was lost and became a rabid animal." Maul reiterated, grimacing at the memory as his benefactor led him down a branching corridor. "Such was how you found me. Broken. Discarded." He cast a rueful look at the lights above with a hiss, restraining a scowl as his hands twitched behind his back. "I have missed so much. The Force feels out of balance. What has transpired in my absence?" If he was at all offended by his impudence, Kar did little to show it. Instead, he merely favored him with that strange smile of his and led him to yet another door, which Maul soon realized wasn't a door at all. The gateway parted to reveal a landing pad and lush forest beyond, the beauty of the setting sun all but eclipsed by frenzied activity branches and other personnel going about their work. Countless craft came and went with each passing moment, some discharging their cargo, others being boarded by men and women in gleaming silver armor. Engrossed as they were in the tasks at hand, no one spared so much as a passing glance for the two Sith, nor did Maul give them any consideration until they were nearly past them. And just where do you think you're going? A blur of silver and violet snaked out as they passed one of the drop ships, snagging the Dark Lord by the arm and forcefully hauling him backwards. Maul might have missed entirely, had he not been walking beside him, as it were he barely registered the short-lived assault until it was over. It would have been downright worrisome, if not for the strangled Squawk car mate. By then the attacker already had the Sith Lord pinned against a bulkhead, and was doing their best to flatten him against it. Kenobi, the Sith overlord, growled, "Was that really necessary?" "Entirely," came the sensuous reply. "You're late, Naruto." "Damn, woman. Must you insist on using that name?" In response, she all but welded herself to him. "Missed you." "I missed you too." Dragging him into a crushing kiss, the woman gave Car one final lasting embrace and stepped away, lending Maul a fleeting glimpse of firm curves encased in a black and violet flight suit. Pale eyes and dark hair. She caught him staring and glowered back at him, those eerie orbs narrowing. They flicked up and down, as though assessing his worth. He could sense her strength, her emotions were open to him, to the world, a sure sign that she didn't give a fig what anyone thought of her. Indeed, the dark side burned bright in her, fanning the flames of her jealousy to new heights. Clearly, she disliked him already. "So, you're the one he's been so fixated on as of late." Stupefied, Maul could only manage the most meager of nods. The wickedly curved saber at her waist told him all he needed to know. "Ah. A lover then? Or perhaps an apprentice? And you are better than you in every way," the newcomer replied haughtily, lightning crackling at her fingertips. "Care to see for yourself?" "Kenobi." Car's voice rose in warning. "Could you please refrain from shocking him?" The woman deflated somewhat, but the intensity never left her eyes. All right. Have it your way. I'll go submit my report. I'll see you afterwards, I promise." An arched brow was raised. "Yes. You will." Without so much as a passing glance, the staff wielder drifted away. The silence must have been telling, because Car proved quick to remedy it. "My wife," the Sith confessed with a laugh. It almost sounded genuine. "Peace is a lie, there is only passion. I adhere to that doctrine a bit more strictly than others." "So it would seem. Do you have family, Maul?" Again with the unexpected questioning. "I do." He relented after a moment's thought. "A brother." "I'll have to ask Ventress to pay a visit to Dathomir then. He should be by your side when this begins." The Zabrak frowned. "You don't know his name." At that, Car offered another laugh. Maul turned his gaze back to the ships, considering. Now that he was no longer distracted by that infernal woman, he recognized the military-grade hardware among the crates. Thermal detonators, blaster rifles, missiles, armor. These weren't mere food drops, as he'd first suspected. No, their purpose was far more sinister. No relief vessels, these were warships. "You are preparing for battle." "Yes," would-be Sidious is doing. His benefactor confirmed, stepping around a shuttle and back into the fading light. "There is conflict, or rather, there soon will be, thanks to your master's machinations. No love lost there, I'm afraid. You were replaced quite easily." For the first time since they'd met, his perpetual smile seemed to dim somewhat. That rat bastard hold no value for his pawns once they outlive their usefulness. A pang of betrayal stabbed at Maul's chest, twisting the knife. Yet another reminder of how he'd been cast aside. Ah yes. War. So. It began. Without me. You can begin again, you know. Taken aback, Maul turned to find Car standing there waiting. His arm outstretched towards him, palm upturned. Even then, it took him a handful of seconds to realize what his fellow Sith was offering him. At first, he refused to believe it. Surely, it had been destroyed. But no, he remembered the slim metal cylinder all too well. What? His mind stirred. He recognized the weapon at once. His lightsaber rather, what remained of it. Never had he wanted something so badly, until he received it. Take it, Maul. Carr urged. It's yours. Reclaim your rightful place. Tentatively, the tattooed Zabrak reached out for it with the force, only to watch the weapon remain inert in Carr's hand. Then it stirred. Ever so slightly, little more than a tiny twitch. With an angry grimace, he pulled harder, willing the weapon to leave the man's hand. It responded at once, shooting out of Carr's palm to smack into his waiting grasp. Responding to the pressure of his grasp, it ignited at once, a single ruby-red blade burning furiously into the night. The sound felt like coming home, reuniting with a piece of himself he hadn't even realized he'd been missing. With that, came a realization. No, not just a realization. A reckoning. I was apprenticed to the most powerful being in the galaxy once. He growled, tightening his hand around the scorched hilt, until he felt the flesh of his hand threaten to tear. I was destined to be so much more. But I was robbed of that destiny by the Jedi. A snarl forced its way through his clenched teeth. By Obi-Wan Kenobi? And you will have your revenge. Carr reassured him stoically. In due time. Extinguishing his saber, Maul fixed the blonde with a burning stare. There was something in the way he'd phrased that. You have his location? A nod. I do indeed. Then tell me. Fury threatened to burn a hole through his chest as he rounded on Carr. I demand retribution. No, the blonde reproved him with a sharp look, silencing him. Killing a Jedi is too quick. Merciful, even. They must be made to see the error of their ways. Explain. We shall make him become the very thing he despises. Carr informed him briskly, golden eyes narrowing to slits of poisoned honey. He will forsake the Jedi and the light utterly. Willingly. When all is said and done, he will embrace the darkness, and turn on those he once called his own. And if not, in the unlikely event that he refuses to see reason, then you may have him. I believe that manner of vengeance is a fine start, don't you agree? Regardless of the outcome, be it defeat or victory, he will be destroyed. What say you? Are you proposing an alliance? I am. The Dark Lord replied readily. Maul took a moment to contemplate those words. True, he wanted Kenobi to suffer. To share his pain. That much was non-negotiable. But what form must that suffering take? Perhaps Carr was right. Perhaps death was too swift an end. He wanted to the Jedi to suffer, and what better way to make him suffer than by destroying all that he was? And if that failed, well, there was always the alternative. Allowing a savage smile to tear across his face, Maul clasped Carr's hand in his own. Yes. He smiled coldly. We will start with revenge. Chapter 17. A Sith Holiday, Part 2. The shuttles descended rapidly. Like a swarm of angry ebony locusts cutting through the waning twilight of Coruscant itself, so too did the vessels rocket towards their destinations across the planet. Dozens of them, no, he amended. Hundreds. Too many to shoot down, let alone detain. Not that they had the numbers to attempt such a feat, they'd been caught off guard by the sudden invasion, left wholly, utterly unprepared for the Sith's abrupt arrival. What meager forces they did possess were all but overwhelmed by the sheer number of the enemy. It was over before it began. The Republic didn't have an army. It hadn't for quite some time. There had been no need for it. No threat large enough to demand the idea of a standing force dedicated to safeguarding the galaxy. For centuries that task had fallen to the Jedi, their sacred duty to uphold the Republic and all that it stood for. They'd failed. Now, anyone denizen fool enough to challenge or otherwise impede the incoming shuttles was gently, but firmly locked down by a tractor beam and shunted aside. The more rowdy craft, or those pilots more prone to panic, were met with ion cannons, and forced to land regardless, briskly put in their place, and left immobilized to be dealt with later. Throughout it all, not a single life was taken by the enemy. Mace Windu soon saw why. He sensed him well before he saw it. A dark shadow pressing through the Force. At the forefront of the swarm, one vessel lurked, larger than the rest, looming over the chaos. Unlike its brethren who each had their own orders, it made straight for the Senate. Jet black wings folded back on themselves as the vessel neared, briskly making way for the hulking landing gear housed beneath the bulk of their bodies. The speed of its descent kicked up a bitter breeze, a mighty gale that all but threatened to blast off those awaiting its arrival below. Thrusters flared to life, its engines burning white-hot as the pilot made a fair show of attempting to guide the towering craft to its final resting place. It was, he decided, an ill omen. Worse, there was nothing they could do about it. With the threat of that fully operational battle station, some were already calling it the Death Star, looming overhead, there was nothing anyone could do for fear of imminent retaliation or worse, complete annihilation. If that thing could wipe out a moon, then a planet like Coruscant wasn't beyond imagination. Oddly enough, its arrival hadn't stirred the populace into a panic as they'd feared. If anything, they seemed strangely hardened by the abrupt arrival of the so-called Sith and his armada. It made no sense. All of this, none of it made any sense. Why would the people cheer? There would be conqueror. Maybe because I'm not here to conquer. Ever consider that? Any icy tendril of scornful annoyance stabbed out at the Jedi Master through the Force, causing him to recoil. A peal of amused laughter greeted him even as he ruthlessly severed his brief connection to the dark, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Warily, he turned his gaze to his fellow Jedi who stood beside him. Many of them, those who could be recalled on such short notice, had gathered to meet this envoy. Grand Master Yoda, unreadable as ever. Masters Luminara as well as Shakti, not fully recovered from their wounds, yet still present besides. Skywalker and Kenobi, the latter returned from his brief foray to Kamino with a fresh scar and a decidedly haunted look about him, and others besides. He knew in his heart of hearts it wouldn't be enough. Not nearly enough. Against one Sith they would surely triumph. But a lone Sith car was not. He trained others, steeped them in the ways of the dark side, and brought an army to Coruscant's doorstep. It was their darkest hour, with no light in sight. Even so, he wanted to hope. The Sith would be a fool to come in person, surely? As to answer that very question, the lead shuttle performed an abrupt nosedive and dove towards the. With an ear-splitting squeal of metal meeting metal, the vessel slammed into the landing pad and plowed forward, forcing all those assembled to draw back lest they be crushed beneath its oncoming weight. Even Master Windu took a swift step backwards, unwilling to risk injury before the true battle could be joined. Likewise, a wave of brown robes retreated in the face the rapidly approaching craft, their owners igniting their lightsabers as they prepared for what would undoubtedly be the greatest fight of their lives. As the rest had. All save one. Yoda. The Grand Master stood his ground before the shuttle, an immutable pillar, an ancient tree that refused to be uprooted. His sole concession to the danger was a slight tilt of the head. The Force blazed to light, and the broken shuttle ground itself to an agonizing halt as though seized by a giant hand. Unperturbed by their failure, the vessel's pilot sprang into action. A long ramp extended from the belly of the beast, a gateway to darkness shrouded in fog. After a moment of painstaking silence, a stilted figure resolved itself from within the haze. Windu extended his senses, only to find that he couldn't sense the figure at all. As it stepped into the light, the Master saw why. It wasn't even organic. It was a droid. It raised its arms. "Greetings, Jedi meatbags." HK-47 boomed, cackling merrily. "It is my sincere pleasure to introduce my master." An awkward pause followed his declaration, followed by a harsh clang. "Master. Shit." A muffled voice exclaimed within the belly of the shuttle, a thread of exasperation weaving its way into their tone. "I wasn't ready. This is why I don't let you fly shuttles, dumbass. Now look what you did. Went and ruined the entrance. I had a speech prepared, and everything, and you screwed it up. It was my understand that you wanted to minus. Shut up. Just roll with it." It was not, all things considered, what one might expect to hear from a Dark Lord of the Sith. Threats of violence perhaps, or warnings of impending doom. Maiming at the very least. Barring that, an invasion of sorts. Not this back and forth banter that utterly robbed the moment of all its tension. Was it Windu's imagination, or had Yoda laughed just now? Well, well, well. Recovering swiftly from the somewhat unexpected snafu, the owner of that rough cadence emerged from the smoke. I blow up one moon and suddenly you Jedi are crusading while my Sith are invading. Funny how that works out. Said tension came roaring back as Carr emerged from the wreckage of the shuttle with something of a small army at his back. Faces old and new followed him, some he recognized, others not. There was the towering Kailash in his battle armor, the one who collected the sabers of fallen Jedi. Beside him lurked a devilish-looking Zabrak, the sight of which rendered Kenobi pale with a rare burst of anger. Between them a young woman with eyes the color of lavender, a saber staff gripped tight in her left hand. Further back, shielded by a pair of what he could only assume were unknown apprentices, stood Barriss herself, those bright eyes of hers flicking anxiously over all those present. To his mild dismay even Senator Amidala was present, though he knew not why. For some reason Skywalker seemed somewhat distressed at this. All of them were dwarfed by the Dark Lord. Though nowhere near as tall as Grievous, he stood apart from them all regardless. His very presence seemed to drink in the light itself, as though he were a beacon of the dark. And yet he laughed. Windu. Carr boomed, spreading his arms wide as though asking for a hug. Feels like years since we last saw each other. You having a good Christmas? Don't worry, still gotcha some presents. A muscle jumped in Mrs. Jaw. Your arrogance betrays you, Sith. You were a fool to come here. I always was a slow learner. The masked man retorted. Well then. Gathering himself, the Vapad master seized control of the situation and strode forward to meet the enemy. For his part Carr didn't deny him, even when he halted well within arm's length. A single saber stroke would be all it took to end it. One swing, and the body of the snake would be left without the head. Perhaps sensing this thought, Carr's retina tensed only to still at his gesture. Naruto tilted his head. Chaos, greed, hate, darkness. He muttered to himself. Hope, wisdom, altruism, light. We all have these within us. What? I wear a coat of many colors, Master Windu. He continued quietly, the words still muffled behind the impenetrable slate of his mask. Rogue knight, villain, hero, conqueror, redeemer, sinner and saint. Call me a madman if you wish, condemn my every act if it truly makes you feel better. But know this madman has done more good for the galaxy in the last decade than your kind has in the last century. Do you hear the people? It's my name they're chanting down there. Not yours. What say you to that? And now you insult your guest with silence. Why am I not surprised? Enough. Draw your blade, or die where you stand. No, the Sith refuted calmly. No. Shakti uttered a soft sigh. And here we go. Listen, Windu. Naruto sighed, palming his mask. I hear what you're saying. Really? I do, and I direction your attention to this. He waved grandly at the empty air between them. There's nothing there. Exactly. Carr clapped his hands, producing a sharp pop of sound. Those are all the fucks I give. I live by one rule, Master Jedi. And that is, if you don't want something taken from you, don't take from others. But today I'm feeling merciful. That doesn't make any sense. Of course it does. With a sharp laugh the blonde spun away from him and stepped aside as something or someone moved deep within the bowels of his ship. Several, in fact. Each carrying a package. What madness was this? Now, enough with all this gloom and doom talk. I came to celebrate. Who wants presents? Peace on earth and all that shit. Let's see, you get a present, you get a present. And Merry Christmas. Chapter 18. Brothers, Fragment. A stranger had come to Dathomir. Savage had seldom seen such ships before. Only ever from a distance, and none like this. The craft descended from on high into their village at speed, a sleek black orb that seemed to pulse with life if one gazed at it over long. Many of the Knight brothers shied back from it, not out of awe, but dread. Even Farrell, his own brother, retreated from it. Savage did not share in his fear, rather he found himself curious. Only a fool would come here without permission, and none had been given by the Night Sisters. A fool? Or a man without fear? So which was this, then? As he looked on, the craft settled just before the main dwelling. With a hiss of steam, its ramp descended. No one emerged. The Knight brothers looked among themselves. One of them dared to creep forward, only to recoil as the sound of footsteps reached them. Finally a figure in dark armor disembarked. Off his face young Savage could see nothing, for it lay concealed behind a horrifying mask, but his presence spoke for him. His very being exuded quiet menace, wrath restrained, like some great billowing cloud fit to unleash lightning upon those below. That masked visage craned left, then right on a swivel, considering each of them in turn. At length, he spoke. I seek Savage oppress. Though muffled by the mask, his voice carried power and strength, subtle yet stern. Anger, but leashed. Controlled. Who among you can lead me to him? His gaze settled upon Farrell, and some sixth sense spurred Savage forward. I am he. He spoke slowly, willing his voice not to quaver. The masked visage snapped toward him. So you are. He started forward, and as one, the Knight brothers bridled against him, trying to protect the young brothers. Foolish. A gloved hand swept out, fingers crooked into a claw. Savage saw what others did not. In his mind's eye, some hidden part of him felt the sudden spike of electricity in the air before it came. 5 bolts of vicious violet-white lightning slammed into his kin and threw them aside as one might straw dolls. One by one the warriors fell. None rose again. One had but to see the smoking ruin of their chests to know what fate awaited. By some miracle Farrell had been spared. Now he raised his fists and readied himself to fight, though they knew it to be futile. Fool of a boy. The masked man growled. I'm not here for you. Stand aside, or be struck down. Savage thrust himself between them. I'm the one you want. Leave him be. He had the strange. I've been looking for you. You're just as my vision told me. And yet not. He made a noise of approval. Seems I'm early. You're still a boy. Talzin hasn't gotten her claws into you yet. Had he come here knowing who he was? Preposterous. Savage had never left Dathomir. Who are you? Formerly Naruto. Now. A low amused chuckle echoed within the ghastly help he wore. Just Car. Think of me as a friend. Not doing very friendly things. Farrell hedged. Car spared him a glance. Some steel in you. Good. You'll need that. Behind him, a Knight brother staggered to his feet, clinging to the dregs of life. Club in hand, he staggered forward and swung. Car's right hand, still slack at his side, made a fist. The brother didn't choke. That would imply his death was anything other than instant. His head bent the other way and his body crumpled to the floor. Farrell quivered. Savage felt something stir inside him. How does one learn such power? How indeed? Car rumbled a laugh. A true master does not reveal his secrets so easily. Are you afraid? Both brothers winced. Nobody cared who I was until I put on the mask. Most people can't stand it. That masked visage tilted just so. They scream and they cry. Much as you want to do now. Yet you don't. You're brave. I think I'll have a use for the two of you. And Maul might be happy to see his kin. A hand reached up and removed that horrifying mask, revealing the man beneath. Savage blinked, somewhat taken aback. He was just a man. A human too, and a strange one that. Whiskered cheeks and blonde hair. But his eyes were wrong. Not blue, but a vicious, poisonous gold. The color of the dark side itself. Join me. He held out a hand to them both. And I will teach how you everything I know. Savage and Feral exchanged a baffled look. The latter didn't hesitate. He marched up the ramp with purpose in his step. And so his destiny changed. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next video, as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.